if everybody is back, I'm excited to introduce to you today Tyler Rauer. He is the Vice President of Legal at Pax8. He has legal experience in complex transactions with the US and overseas, data privacy, M&A, marketing, and intellectual property. He regularly speaks to civic, community, and business groups on a range of trade policy, business, and investment law issues. But even more interestingly, Tyler has also won a swimsuit competition of a male beauty pageant by dressing as a mermaid and has negotiated peace agreements with insurgents in multiple countries. He's also had a free lunch from Chipotle for a full year, and he survived. So during this session, Tyler is going to put thinking global into perspective for us. He will discuss global mindsets, non-traditional paths, and flexible approaches to international business. Tyler, take it away.
All right, thanks, Karen. I appreciate the introduction. I should explain the free Chipotle for a year. That was because the law firm where I was a partner, one of our clients was Chipotle, and their headquarters was across the street from us. So we had Chipotle lunch catered every day, and it was a great way to keep all of us attorneys sitting at our desk working away. Didn't have to go out for lunch. Okay, so I've been asked to talk to you guys a little bit about, careers in the global sphere and sort of international careers and what you can do to sort of move in that direction. And I think I want to start us off by level setting a little bit and sort of saying a little bit about why I think most people that I know anyway have approached their career path in, with a global perspective, with a little bit of the cart before the horse. What do I mean by that? I mean that if you want to work internationally, right, if you want to have an international career, we have to first recognize that you don't do anything. International isn't a thing that you do, right? You have a baseline of your career, what you're actually doing, what you're selling, or what you're working in the public sector, you've got some cause that you're working for, some mission that has been given to you. If you're working in the private sector, you're selling some product or service. And you do those things, and sometimes you do those things across borders, and many of us really enjoy doing those things across borders. But crossing borders isn't a career path unto itself. You're always crossing borders for some reason, right? You're working cross-culturally, you're working, it could be across faiths, it could be across, cultures or governments or businesses, but there's always some reason that you're working internationally. And the international part of it typically is not the main focus. And I see a lot of people, especially younger people, getting that backwards, that they know they want to do things overseas. They know they want to work internationally. And so that's what they're looking for. And they will grasp at anything that they can do internationally. And my take on it is that sets you up for disappointment, largely because the substance of what you're doing is so rarely international in focus, or exclusively international. You've got some other activity that's underlying everything else that you do. And if you have selected the wrong underlying activity, then you're not going to be happy, even if you're doing that activity across borders. So I think I'd like us to reframe our approach to working internationally a little bit, and think of it. So what I'm not going to give you is a bunch of, tactics about networking and working and getting your LinkedIn profile straight and all of those things. That, and you're supposed to, if you want to work internationally, it's beneficial to have more than one language. That you need to take a few classes here and there. It's all baseline. Everybody knows that. What I want to do is help you think more fully about what working internationally is and how that's maybe more of a mindset than a career goal, right? So I'll take a step back here and say that whatever career path you're taking, your mindset's going to matter a lot more than the jurisdiction or jurisdictions that you're doing the work in. So I would put sort of a global mindset as the key to working internationally. That in anything you do, so long as you have a global mindset, that's going to be a key to your success. You'll be able to see opportunities where others might miss them. And you'll be able to grow into a role where you are working across borders more easily. So that's sort of where I would start with. And I think there's a few other mindsets that will help you in your career path as well. Things like a growth mindset and being authentically yourself moving forward. If you're always thinking about ways that you can grow as a human being, just do what you find interesting and what lights you up, you know, and you're authentically yourself in what you're doing, and you're not trying to please other people. You're not trying to be something that you're not, and that you have this global mindset. I think that will serve folks pretty well. So there's a few points that I would raise with that kind of out of the way, right? We're moving and going into an international career away from a set of things, a list of things that you have to do in order to get there, and more into the background, or actually deeper into the core of who you are, that what you're going to be doing, whether it's accounting or finance or diplomacy or, you know, I don't know, legislative interpretation, whatever you want to do, you get good at that skill or those skill sets first so that you can apply them across borders. I think that's the most important part. And in everything that you do, you have a global mindset, you're thinking globally. One of the biggest errors or flaws that I've seen, especially for Americans, and especially for Americans in the private sector, is that they tend to think of, you know, the United States and domestic work on the one hand, and then international or global work on the other, forgetting that the United States is part of the globe, right? That things that happen inside the United States are quite often tied very closely to things that are happening internationally. And the most successful American businesses, for example, that I've seen, tend to see their business purpose globally, with the United States as one part of a global view. And to the extent that you can bring a mindset like that into your profession, you can make a lot of inroads. You can really help a lot of companies move forward in the best way globally, right? Because those who tend to focus on, who bifurcate the United States from the rest of the world, that's a hard path to success. They're going to set up two different sets of systems. Things aren't going to be integrated very easily. The more global your mindset is, the easier it is to integrate what you're doing across different cultures and across different jurisdictions. Having that global mindset, frankly, also makes you more flexible, more adaptable, better able to see opportunities where others might not see them. And it, I think, sets you up best for success for finding a global career in the Denver area. And this is a distinction that I think is important, right? There are some sectors that are more prone to international work than others. For example, the public sector is much more prone to globalism and globalization than the private sector is, broadly speaking, right? It's, there are NGOs or governmental organizations that are set up solely to do international work. The thing is that most of that work in the public sector are in a few places scattered around the world. So think Geneva, London, New York, DC. In those places, you can just go be quote unquote international. And that's something that you can do there. Denver is a different market. Colorado generally, the middle of the country, really anywhere outside of those global cities where NGOs and governmental agencies tend to be headquartered, your strategy just has to be different because the needs are different and the employment needs are different in those places. So if you want to go to Geneva or London or New York or DC to work and to get some of this experience, then by all means you should do it. Interning in those places is a great thing to do, but understand that those spots are limited. And if you truly do have a passion for international affairs and for doing things globally, then you're going to need to be able to adapt to the market that you're in. And that's a hard thing to do. I will be very honest. I had a hard time adapting to Colorado when I came back here from DC. For those of you who aren't familiar with me, I went to law school in DC and happened to be in law school during 9/11. And so, and I spoke Persian and had a certain skill set that was useful to our government. So since I was already in DC and I had been personally touched by September 11th, and I never wanted to see something like that happen again, I joined our Department of Defense and I went overseas and did counterterrorism work for about 10 years. And that was a unique experience in my life. It's not one that most people are going to have, and it's not one that, frankly, I recommend. It's hard. It was hard. It was hard to see the things that I saw in that space. It was hard to do the things that I had to do. And I don't think anybody should have to do that without, a good hard look in themselves about whether they really can. It was a rough way to get my international chops. I'll just put it that way. That said, it has served me well, but when I decided when I started having children and decided that what I was doing was a little bit too dangerous for the family that I wanted to have, and I came back home, very hard time because I had been working overseas so much. I had a hard time adapting myself to the market here in Denver. So what I chose to do was simply to go back to my original plan, which was to be sort of a business-oriented sort of corporate attorney, which is what I've done. But because I had that international experience, I was able to sort of spin that into international mergers and acquisitions and do the things that move my career forward in the way that I wanted to. But in order to be where I am now, which is the vice president of legal at a rapidly expanding company. Since I started, we've bought 3 companies overseas and we're in the process of buying 2 more. So I'm doing international work all the time. But in order to get to that point, I had to get really good at the baseline skills of being a good corporate attorney. That's the core of what I do. I'm just an American corporate attorney who happens to do some work overseas. And so I have that global mindset, and it has been useful to me because it is very hard in the Denver area to be a solely international professional. It just is. It's just a tough thing to be able to do. So that, I think, is the major the major take home that I'd like for you guys to see is that, you know, it's difficult to simply be an internationalist here. You need to be good at a skill or at a certain set of skills that are useful across industries, that's useful solely in the United States, so that you can translate that across borders as well. And what I see happening with a lot of young folks in particular, a lot of folks who are in school, is that we tend to be focused very much on being international and having an international career, and that then becomes the focus of everything we do. And we therefore miss some opportunities that are there that we could seize, that we could grab a hold of, and then move forward with our career. And from my perspective, you kind of have to grow into an international career from anywhere outside of those major global cities. So if you're in Geneva, you're going to be doing something international. If you're in London, you've got a decent shot at it. If you're in New York or DC, you've got a good shot at it. But pretty much anywhere else, you've got to be good at something else and then be able to translate that across borders. That's really what we're looking at here. And I think that's actually a real blessing, because then you don't have to be so forward about how international you are all the time. It doesn't have to be the core of who you are. It sort of sinks deep into you as something that you know about yourself, that that you think about the world in global terms. That's a good mindset to have. And then whatever you're doing, you can translate that into an international career as you grow into your career more broadly. So that's sort of the take-home message that I wanted to give to you. Now we can go into some Q&A and those sorts of things, but I see Karen is on screen. So Karen, do you have any place in the discussion you'd like to direct me to go, or any questions you want to ask?
Well, just kind of on that same token, what would you say to other veteran and military students here on the call today about how to transition, especially with your military background, right? So how to transition back into civilian life, but also how to transition back into civilian life with these international experiences built into your military career, and adapting those into your civilian career.
Right. Okay. Good question. So first of all, the transition from serving your country in that space, especially in the military or defense or security space, to the civilian world is a tough transition for everybody at all times. It's always a hard thing to do. For me, it felt a lot like going through. I've never gone through drug addiction withdrawals, but I imagine that's what I went through is emotionally is sort of similar to it, because it felt like, I was on edge all the time, always overseas, always working hard. I had a very clear mission and something that I was good at that does not translate into the private sector, right? We as former security professionals have to understand that the skills that we gained, especially the hard skills that we gained, don't translate. And so we have to be able to use some of the softer skills that we gained. And those are things like, cross-cultural communication, being able to work with anybody around the world, discipline, project management, there are a lot of good skills that come out of military service, but you are going to need to be able to leave some of the skills that you develop behind, right? Like, I had to get it through my skull that nobody in Denver was trying to bomb a village in Pakistan. So the skills that I had for the law of armed conflict and human rights law and those sorts of things, while necessary for the work that I was doing overseas, didn't matter really to anybody here. And so you have to take your broader skill set and build on that. And then, as far as being able to use those skills for international careers, you do have an advantage. So most folks who have been in the armed forces have served overseas somewhere. I know that, for example, my grandfather served in the Navy during World War II. And he came home and essentially built my hometown. Every school that I ever went to was built by my grandfather. And he had his time overseas gave him a perspective that most people in my hometown didn't have. Like, I remember sitting at the kitchen table with my grandpa and my dad. We're farmers in Nebraska. Sitting at the kitchen table, poring over grain futures prices in different markets around the world and trying to see, using that to forecast what we were going to grow within our, few thousand acres in Nebraska. So, and Grandpa did that both with farming and with his own sort of personal investments that he developed over the years. And he was very successful, largely because he had this global mindset. The man didn't go back overseas until he was well into his 70s. He went back to Germany. My family's originally from Germany, and so he went to a family reunion back there. But between sitting on a ship in the Pacific and going when he was in his 20s and going to Germany in his 70s, he spent 50 years in Nebraska, but with a view on the world and how the world impacted him. That really helped him in his life and his career, and it paid dividends for, his children and his children's children, and it continues to. So that mindset that you gain by serving your country can go a long way to your career transition, moving from veteran status, from being an active duty military or other government service that isn't I don't know, I would say lionized in the same way. So former State Department, former, when I was overseas, the bravest people I knew were in the U.S. Agency for International Development, or NGOs, because they would go out into some very dangerous areas with no protection. And so, the skills that those folks have in those areas are really, really useful as well. So I think those are the main areas. One, understand that you're going to have to jettison some of what you have learned, right? That some of what you know from your service to our country just isn't relevant outside of that space, but also recognizing that some of what you learned is incredibly valuable, and that so long as you can be clear about what is valuable and what translates and what doesn't, and you can focus on what translates, then I think you'll be set up in a relatively good spot. So that's my answer to that question. And Karen, I see the one from the prior session about what do I see as the most disrupting technology for trade in the near term and long term. Actually, I think the most disruptive technology isn't technology at all, but our reaction to technology, and that is in data privacy. That global data privacy concerns are going to drive how business is done across borders. I see it a lot now. I think it's also going to impact what happens inside the United States. For example, Europe's data privacy law. Europe is very keen on using their market power to push the United States to changing how we deal with data privacy. And so far, it's worked incrementally. I do see a conflict ahead in this area. I do think Europe may push the United States even harder on the ability to transfer data out of Europe and into the United States. And if they do that, we're either going to have to change, we, the United States, are probably going to have to change our national privacy law to comply a little bit more with the European Union's GDPR. I just see it coming. I don't think there's another way around it. And my old friends in the national security infrastructure are going to hate it, and they've just got to get over it, because it's happening, and our national security is predicated on our economy and the strength of our economy, and our economy cannot function without the flow of data, especially from the European Union. We function based on that free flow of data and trade and money back and forth, and we're probably going to have to take a little bit of a hit to our national security infrastructure to be able to enable our economy to thrive in the 21st century, is my guess.
I agree. But also, I think that, data security is important, and
Oh, yeah.
we could probably use some more of it. So,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And that the corollary of the data privacy stuff is that, the sort of very illegal private sector side of hackers and ransomware and those sorts of things are also going to disrupt global trade quite extensively. If you've tried to buy cyber risk insurance recently, you know that it's a real concern. So we have both the sort of the good guys protecting everybody's data, but then also the bad guys trying to get access to everybody's data, and those two things operating together, I think, lead us into a space where we live in a technologically and especially internet communication enabled world. So we've got to get better at how we handle that.
Okay, so a next question in the Q&A.
Right.
Can you be patriotic and have a global mindset simultaneously?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They are not mutually exclusive. That is one of the, I don't know who asked this, maybe they were setting me up for it, but I think this is a false dichotomy that has arisen in the United States over the last 5-6 years, that somehow to have a global mindset means that you don't love your own country, and that is just categorically false. It doesn't exist. I mean, you look at some of the people with the some of our best global thinkers have also been some of the most patriotic Americans that have ever existed. I mean, you look at the creation of the global system during and after World War II, the people who created that were patriots. I mean, I don't think anybody would call FDR anything other than a patriot, or Dwight Eisenhower, for God's sakes. We created the global system to help our country and to help everybody else together. There's no reason that this has to be a zero-sum game. In fact, we all do better when we're cooperating. So I do think you can be both a globalist and a patriot, and I will scream that from the mountaintops.
I will too. I'll be there next to you. So how did you become interested in law, and what was your specialization?
Okay. I became interested in law. I think there were a few things going on there. So my specialization in the law is in corporate work, business and corporate work, particularly in international business transactions. When I was not undergrad, but when I got my JD in DC, my primary focus started out in international mergers and acquisitions. And then I shifted that to national security law after 9/11, and then went, sort of on my 10-year detour into the national security space. I did law largely, I think, for two reasons. One is because I grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere, and for all I knew, the only things that you could do when you weren't a farmer was that you could be a doctor, a lawyer, or a banker. Those were the only careers I saw where you weren't wearing coveralls all day. And I'm just not a farmer by nature. When I was 12 years old, I decided that someday I was going to work in an office with air conditioning. And so of the three professions that worked in air conditioning that I was aware of, lawyer sounded the most relevant. So there's that piece of it. And then secondarily, I have a love of politics and policy, really, and doing the right sort of community involvement and doing the right thing for my community. And again, I think this comes from my upbringing in the middle of nowhere and watching, my grandfather was somebody who made a difference for a lot of people. And I wanted to be like that. And so that's what got me interested in politics. And so I majored in political science in undergrad. And about halfway through my junior year, I realized that you can't actually do that for a living, right? Like it's not one of those things that translates very well, at least not into a very lucrative living. So I thought, well, I have three options with a political science degree. I can go to DC and make no money and be subject to the whims of people's opinions for the rest of my life. Or I can get a PhD and teach, or I can be a lawyer. Like those are the three options. So I chose to try to combine two of those and go to law school and be a lawyer, but do it in DC, where if I decided I wanted to do politics, I could do that too. And so that's why I chose the law and my path there. And the law is one of those professions that you can very well, it's adaptable to an international mindset. There's a lot of ways that you can do legal work across borders. Not the only one though. There's, finance and accounting and, business administration and marketing. There's all kinds of things that happen across borders, especially in the private sector. The law is just a relatively easy one.
Is that still your passion, or what is your passion, and how do you translate that into your professional life if it's not?
Yeah, so my passion, if you want to call it passion, right? I sort of view it as a Venn diagram, right? Like where what I'm good at, plus what I enjoy doing, plus what the world needs, where those three things converge, that's where I want to be. So I'm really good at law. Like I'm a good lawyer. I am fully confident to sort of say, like, I've done it for a long time. I get it. I understand it. I'm good at it. There are parts of it that suck, right? Like there are 80-hour and 100-hour weeks, and there are things that I don't enjoy. And, the worst part about being a lawyer is other lawyers and all of this stuff that just exists. But I'm good at it. And I do enjoy it. There are definitely pieces of it that I and in my current role, we're doing something that is, I'm not going to pretend that we're saving the world by distributing cloud software, right? Like that's not what we're doing, but we are making a lot of people's lives easier across the globe. Our whole point at PAX 8 is to sort of make it easier for small and medium-sized businesses to get the technology that they need to be efficient and to do their work better. And we take care of the back office stuff, like all the billing of the vendors that they have. We just make their technology stack easy to handle. And that is not something that's going to, end climate change, and it's not going to bring an end to the Israeli-Palestinian dispute, right? That's not what it's going to do, but it is going to make a lot of people's lives a little bit better. And when everybody is just a little bit less stressed out, life is just better for everybody. So I do think the world actually needs what we're doing. I'm not going to try to oversell it. It's a small thing, but it's helpful and it's fun and our culture is good. And We've, it's a company whose values align really well with mine. A lot of emphasis on diversity and equity and inclusion, and do a lot of work in both urban and rural communities across the United States and across the globe. And it's just good. It makes me feel good to work at PAX 8. It's just a great place to work. And so because it's something that I think the world needs just a little bit, and I'm good at what they need me to do, and I can help them do good stuff, then that's where I want to be, right? And so my passion really just sits in that spot. Like right now, it's at PAX 8, and I'm going to ride this as long as I can, because I think we're doing great stuff, and we're going to do good things for Colorado. But it can quite easily be somewhere else. I don't have to stay in the technology space to have my passion. It's just, it'll probably be in the law somewhere. That's just, I'm at the stage in my life and my career where I'm not shifting that anytime soon. But as long as I'm doing what is good for the world, using my skills to do what's good for the world, then I'm happy to do it. And for anybody who's looking to be a lawyer, I will caution you, there are a lot of folks that need attorneys who are not doing good things for the world, right? So be careful about how you use your skills. That there are some folks who frankly don't deserve you. And you need to know that about yourself, about your own value, and that you don't just have to be a lawyer for anybody who pays you enough, because that's, I have seen that eat people's souls. So my advice is to stay away from that. So any political science or history majors or business majors who are thinking about going to law school, keep that in the back of your mind.
That's good advice. Ethics, right?
Yeah.
So what do you envision global trade looking like in 10 years, considering the ongoing US-China trade war, global material shortages, and bottlenecking becoming more common?
No idea what the global trade environment will look like in 10 years. No clue. I do think we're going to see supply chain innovation. I think that, and this isn't just because I work in the technology space, but there are several companies who see the global supply chain problem. Like I actually happen to believe that most of the world's problems are probably going to be solved by the private sector. The public sector sets the conditions within which the private sector can solve problems, but the UN isn't going to solve climate change. Some company that develops renewable energy storage in such a way that it's fast and easy, that's going to be what helps with climate change. Similarly with supply chains and the US-China trade war and those sorts of things. I think the private sector has a strong role to play there. So on the supply chain in particular, and these bottlenecks and all the stuff that's happened, I think we've got to be careful about ascribing too much enduring value to what has gone on with COVID. Like COVID has broken a lot of supply chains, and that's a pandemic issue. That's a public health concern that sort of intervened on our otherwise, fine system that was moving along. So let's pull out the COVID effect and just say that there are a lot of folks who are using, for example, artificial intelligence to make the supply chain more efficient. I think that's going to continue and increase. I think we're going to see a lot more automation in global trade generally, both in manufacturing, but also just in the technology space and in the supply chain itself, which I think is a good thing because it will free up a lot of us to do much more rewarding work and not just the sort of redundant, repetitive things. Like if a machine can do it, then a human probably isn't happy doing it. So I think that's what we'll see in global trade. As far as the politics of the US and China, I don't know. It's it depends a lot on not just the relationship, right, and how the parties relate to each other, but their own internal dynamics, which are really driving both countries, right? Like there's the US reaction against China, I think, comes from a lot of the same place as your earlier question about patriotism and globalism. And that. So I think that the trade concerns that we have with China are eminently solvable, right? Like I am very nervous about my company, for example, entering China because intellectual property protection is not their strong suit. But it will be someday, and maybe in 10 years, the Chinese government will see that they have enough sort of indigenously developed technology and intellectual property that they'll want to protect that themselves. Or maybe there will be a shift in the United States where we get over our fetish of IP protection and we can actually start seeing that, you know, actually sharing technology is a better way to advance things for everybody. And maybe we can rethink how we do patents and copyrights and trademarks and those sorts of things. So that my guess is our trade war with China, the solution to it lies somewhere in everybody being pissed off about not getting everything that they want. And as long as everybody's trying to get everything that they want, we're not going to get anywhere.
The key is in negotiation, right?
Yeah, well, and in being honest about what's really important to us and what's really important to them, and recognizing our relationship with one another and how we can live together, that we need each other. As much as we hate to admit it, we need each other, and we're all human beings living on the same planet. So, you know, the differences are much less than the similarities.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Tyler, for such an informative lecture or presentation today. So we are going to take a short break, but first, everybody join me in thanking Tyler. And if you haven't already, please use the link in the chat box to sign up for the giveaway for this session. Tyler, thank you so much. It was such a great pleasure having you here today.
Thanks, Karen. It was good to see you again. We'll
nice
talk
to see you too.
All right.
Talk soon.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.